All right, let's get right into it. We've been hearing about the rate of global warming for years now, right? But what if that rate has secretly doubled? There's some new research out that poses a really startling question. Is our planet heating up twice as fast as we've been told? Let's dig in and break down the science.
I mean, we've all felt it. 2023 and 2024 have been absolute scorchers, breaking temperature records all over the place. But here's the thing. These crazy spikes create a huge challenge for scientists. How do you tell if this is just a temporary, headline-grabbing blip, or if it's part of the real underlying long-term trend of climate change? That's the big mystery we need to unravel.
And this brings us right to the heart of the problem. It's something scientists call separating the signal from the noise. So think of it like this. You're trying to tune into a radio station, and you can just barely hear the music. That's the signal, the true warming trend. But you've got all this static and crackle in the way. That's the noise from natural cycles, and it makes hearing the actual music incredibly tough.
Let's just put these side by side. On one hand, you have the noise. This is all the temporary stuff, the warming and cooling events caused by natural cycles. They can seriously throw off the data for a year, maybe two. But the signal, well, that's what we're really after. That's the consistent change happening over decades, the true rate of human-caused warming.
So who are the main culprits making all this statistical noise? Well, there are three usual suspects. First up, you've got the El Niño and La Niña cycle, which can give global temperatures a temporary boost or dip. Then there are major volcanic eruptions. They blast sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, which acts like a giant sunshade and causes a bit of temporary cooling. And finally, you have tiny variations in the sun's brightness.
You know, we've actually been fooled by this noise before. I'm sure many of you remember all that talk about a global warming pause back in the early 2000s. It was everywhere, with headlines suggesting the problem was over. But it wasn't. As we got more data, it became super clear that it was just a temporary blip, a period of noise, and not a change in the real long-term signal. Okay, so how do scientists actually do it? How do they cut through all that noise? Well, it's not just guesswork. They have a very specific toolkit full of statistical methods, and each tool is designed to filter out that natural interference so they can zero in on the real signal.
So for this study, the researchers followed a really clear four-step process. First, they gathered 5 of the most trusted global temperature data sets out there, from places like NASA and NOAA and NASA. Next, they calculated the exact impact of those usual suspects, El Niño, volcanoes, and the sun. And then comes the magic step. They statistically removed all that noise from the data. And what's left behind? The clean underlying trend line. One of the key tools in their kit is something called lagged correlation analysis. Now, it sounds super complex, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's about how one thing affects another, but with a time delay. Think about it. A big El Niño event warms up the Pacific Ocean, right? But the biggest hit to the atmosphere's temperature might not show up for a couple of months. This tool accounts for that lag, so it correctly links the cause with its effect down the road. The other big tool they used is called a piecewise linear fit. Instead of just trying to draw one single straight line through 50 years of messy data, this method is smarter. It uses a series of shorter, connected straight lines, and its real power is that it can find change points, those specific moments in time where the rate of warming might have suddenly sped up or slowed down. The scientists behind this new analysis are oceanographer Stefan Rahmstorf and statistician Grant Foster. They took these very well-tested statistical tools and applied them to all that global temperature data. Their one goal? To strip away all the noise and see if the underlying signal had changed. So, after all that filtering, after removing the effects of El Niño and volcanoes and solar cycles, what did they find? This is the big reveal. The data showed something that had been hiding in plain sight, completely masked by the noise, a significant and very recent acceleration in global warming. Here it is, side by side. The old view, the one based on the noisy data, showed a pretty steady warming trend since the 1970s of about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. But the new finding, with the noise stripped out, reveals an accelerating trend. It's now running at approximately 0.4 degrees Celsius per decade. That's a doubling of the warming rate. Let's just focus on that number for a second. 0.4 degrees Celsius. This is the new adjusted rate of warming the planet is experiencing every single decade, according to this analysis. It's a really stark figure, and it completely reframes how we should think about our current climate path. This chart just makes the shift so obvious. On the left, that's the long-term trend we thought we were on.
But the analysis found a change point right around 2015. And on the right, you see the new, much steeper trend since then. The jump from the old rate to the new one is, well, it's pretty dramatic. And just to be crystal clear, this isn't some statistical fluke caused by the last couple of ridiculously hot years. The researchers are very specific about this. The acceleration is statistically significant, and you can see it in the data even if you completely ignore 2023 and 2024. The signal is that strong. Okay, so the science points to this hidden acceleration. The rate of warming seems to have doubled, but what does that actually mean for us, for our climate targets? Let's get to the verdict. First, a really quick but super important clarification. When you hear about the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris Accord target, it's not about one hot day or even one hot year. Breaching that target means the 20-year average temperature is consistently 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. It's about the long-term trend, which makes this whole discussion about signal versus noise even more critical. So this timeline really puts the new finding into perspective. The old trend got going in the 70s. Around 2015, the data shows that's when the rate accelerated. And here's the kicker. If this new, faster rate of warming holds, the paper projects that we will cross that critical 1.5 degree long-term threshold by late 2026. That is way, way sooner than most other estimates have suggested. The authors themselves don't mince words. Their paper concludes with this really powerful statement. There is no longer any doubt about a recent increase in the warming rate. In other words, once you filter out all the noise, the signal is perfectly, undeniably clear. So what this research presents is a profound challenge. It suggests that climate signal isn't just clear, it's basically a warning siren that's getting louder, and it's doing it faster than we realized. So the final question it leaves us with is a really heavy one. Now that the signal is this clear, what happens next?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to plunge into the sources, pull out the key insights, and really help you cut through all the noise. And let's face it, we've all felt that, haven't we? Especially with big topics like, well, climate change. It's just this constant stream of information. You see headlines, some are alarming, record heat, unprecedented events. Then others seem almost contradictory, maybe talking about natural cycles or pauses. It can leave you feeling, frankly, a bit lost, maybe more confused than informed. How do we figure out what's really going on with the planet's temperature?
It's a very human thing, isn't it? We tend to react to the immediate, the blips in the data. You see a big spike or even a temporary flat spot, and it's tempting to think that's the whole story, like looking at one big wave and trying to judge the tide. But that kind of short-term focus, well, it can lead to real misinterpretation, maybe even unnecessary anxiety. What we truly need is the deep, careful analysis that shows the underlying patterns, the real currents, if you like.
And that is exactly what we're doing today. We're diving deep into a brand new research paper just out in March 2025. It's really quite groundbreaking. It's by two leading climate scientists, also statisticians, who've tackled this exact problem head-on. How do we strip away the noise, those short-term natural bumps and wiggles, to see the actual long-term warming trend? Our mission here is to walk you through some pretty complex stuff, some serious data analysis, but make it clear, make it easy to grasp, so you come away with a really informed perspective, something solid amidst all that noise.
Okay, so to really get why this new research is so significant, let's first talk a bit more about that noise. I mean, if you've paid any attention to climate news recently, you definitely saw the headlines about 2023 and into 2024, big temperature spikes. For a lot of people, it felt like, wow, things are suddenly speeding up way faster. A lot of concern there.
Oh, absolutely. The headlines were everywhere, hottest year, off the charts. It definitely felt like something shifted. What was specifically driving that very immediate, very noticeable heat up?
Well, a huge piece of that puzzle, probably the main driver for that specific period, was happening in the Pacific Ocean. It's this massive system scientists call ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation. And in 2023, carrying into 2024, ENSO was firmly in its El Niño phase.
Right, El Niño. That's the one that generally means warmer global temperatures, isn't it? Compared to La Nina, which cools things.
Exactly. El Niño tends to release a lot of stored heat from the Pacific into the atmosphere, giving global temperatures a nudge upwards. La Nina does the opposite. And, ENSO itself is completely normal. It's a natural rhythm the planet's had for millions of years, shifting between El Niño, La Nina, and neutral conditions every few years. It's not new. But this particular El Niño, the recent one, it was quite potent. It really did put a bit of a turbo boost, as you said, into the system. It was a major factor behind those dramatic spikes we saw in ocean in atmospheric temperatures over the last, say, 18 months really contributed to those records being broken.
Okay, so El Nino acts like a big natural amplifier for heat sometimes. But is it the only natural player messing with a short-term picture? Are there other things that cause these quick but temporary temperature shifts that can kind of skew the data?
Oh, definitely. ENSO is a big one, but it's not alone. Another factor is the sun itself. There's variability in the sun's energy output, solar luminosity. It changes slightly over time, often on roughly an 11-year cycle. It's a totally normal part of how the solar system works. Now, its overall effect on long-term warming isn't huge compared to greenhouse gases, but those small ups and downs, they definitely add to the short-term noise in the temperature record. And then back here on Earth, you've got volcanoes.
Right. Big eruptions.
Exactly. When a large volcano erupts, like Pinatubo back in '91, it blasts huge amounts of sulfur dioxide way up into the stratosphere. That gas turns into tiny sulfate particles, aerosols, and these little particles act like tiny mirrors, reflecting sunlight back to space before it reaches the surface.
So they cool the planet down temporarily.
Precisely. Pinatubo caused a noticeable global dip, maybe ½ degree Celsius, for about 2 or 3 years. Go back further, Tambora in 1815 was even bigger, leading to the year without a summer. It's a powerful but temporary cooling effect.
So we've got these big ocean cycles like El Nino, subtle changes from the sun, and these dramatic but short-lived cooling effects from volcanoes. All seem like normal parts of Earth's climate system over long time scales.
They absolutely are. They're integral parts of how our planet and solar system operate. But the problem when we're trying to isolate the human impact is that they have this very inconvenient effect of messing with the shorter-term trends, the decadal trends. They add all this noise, as the scientists call it, making it much harder to clearly see the underlying signal of human-caused warming. It's like trying to hear a faint, steady tone over loud, fluctuating background music.
And that noise often grabs the headlines.
Yeah.
We see a sharp spike like in 2023 or 24, and boom, cataclysmic warnings. But you're saying, scientifically, we need to be careful not to just look at that spike in isolation.
That's exactly the point. Those recent rises are concerning, no doubt. They fit the pattern of a warming world. But statistically speaking, you can't just take that recent uptick by itself and say, aha, this is the new long-term trend. It's that natural temptation, isn't it? To see a blip and assume it's the new reality, that the underlying trend line has just taken a sharp turn, that's where the careful statistics come in to avoid jumping to conclusions.
That makes sense. It actually reminds me of the flip side of that argument, something we heard a lot about maybe, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The so-called pause in global warming.
Yes. That's a perfect example of why this rigorous analysis is so critical. There was a period, mainly in the early 2000s, say from around 98 to 2012, where the rate of surface warming seemed to slow down a bit. It got labeled the pause or the hiatus in a lot of public discussion. And, well, it fueled a lot of speculation, especially from climate skeptics, suggesting maybe warming had stopped or the models were wrong. But then, as we got more data and scientists did much more detailed forensic analysis, it became really clear that this apparent slowdown wasn't statistically significant in the long run. They found things like, well, more heat was going into the deep ocean during that time, hiding it from the surface measurements. Plus, there were more La Nina events, which, cool things, and slightly lower solar activity.
So other factors were temporarily masking the underlying trend.
Exactly. When you accounted for those natural variations and looked at the whole climate system, ocean heat, ice melt, sea level 3, the long-term warming trend was still clearly there. The pause was basically natural variability doing its thing, temporarily obscuring the human-caused signal. And the key takeaway, which is so relevant now, is that this works both ways. Just like it was scientifically unsound to claim warming had stopped based on that short-term slowdown, it's equally unsound to take a couple of unusually hot years like 2023 and 24 and declare a whole new accelerated paradigm without doing the same careful, statistically robust analysis. As the authors of this new paper, Ramsdorf and Foster, point out, even with the recent hot years sparking debate about acceleration, previous analyses using that strict 95% confidence level hadn't definitively confirmed an acceleration. Why? Because that natural variability was still too strong in the raw data. It muddies the waters.
So understanding this difference, the noisy short-term versus the underlying long-term signal, is absolutely fundamental to actually being well-informed rather than just getting bounced around by headlines. Okay, so this leads us right to the core question this new research addresses. How do scientists get past all these natural bumps and wiggles, these anomalies, to figure out the true trend line? It really does sound like a detective story.
It absolutely is. And it's a story that's just had a major new chapter written by these two experts. We're talking about this paper from March 2025. The authors are Stefan Rahmstorf. He heads a research team at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany, a very well-respected institution, and Grant Foster, a statistician with Tempo Analytics in Maine, USA. Foster especially has spent a huge part of his career focusing specifically on analyzing global temperature trends and teasing out variability. He's published a lot on this. So together, they bring decades of top-tier research experience in both climate science and the kind of advanced statistics you need for this. And their goal was crystal clear. Use the latest computational power to really crunch through these incredibly complex data sets, take out those natural blips methodically, and reveal the real underlying warming trend with more clarity than ever before.
Okay, so before they started their high-tech noise removal, what was the generally accepted picture? What did the trend look like with all that natural variability still included?
Right. They start by acknowledging the baseline. It's been well understood for a while now, really since the 1970s, that the planet's average surface temperature has been on a pretty steady upward path. Even with all the ups from El Niños and downs from volcanoes mixed in, when you averaged it out over decades, the underlying warming rate was calculated at about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. That was the accepted figure, sort of the average pace, including the noise.
That 0.2 degrees per decade figure is familiar. But it brings up something else people often get confused about, including me sometimes. We always hear about the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limit from the Paris Agreement. And I remember reading that 2024 actually hit something like 1.55 degrees above the pre-industrial baseline, the 1850-1900 average. So does that mean we've already blown past the Paris target? Have we failed? It causes a lot of anxiety.
That's such a crucial point, and yeah, it causes a lot of confusion because the headlines often simplify it. The short answer is no. Hitting 1.55 degrees in a single year like 2024 doesn't automatically mean the Paris Accord target has been breached. Not according to the specific rules of the agreement, anyway. The Paris Agreement defines crossing that threshold based on a long-term average, specifically the average over a 20-year period centered on whichever year you're using as your baseline.
Ah, okay. So it's not about one single year popping above the line.
Exactly. Think of it like maybe your average speed on a long road trip. You might briefly go over the speed limit going downhill, but your average speed for the whole trip might still be legal. So while 2024 being that high is definitely a very serious warning sign, it shows how incredibly close we are. It's not the sustained multi-year average breach that the Accord is technically referring to. Understanding that difference between a single-year spike, heavily influenced by things like the strong El Niño, and the long-term average target is really key to interpreting the news accurately and understanding where we truly stand relative to those international goals.
That's a really helpful clarification. Thank you. It underlines just how precise the science needs to be. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts of Rahmstorf and Foster's work. How did they actually do it? How did they manage to filter out that noise and isolate the real trend? What tools did they use?
Right, so their first step involved a pretty standard but powerful statistical technique called change point analysis, or CPA. Essentially, CPA is designed to sift through a time series like temperature data over many years and pinpoint specific moments in time where the data's statistical behavior significantly changes. It's like looking for kinks or sharp turns in the trend. In climate science, it's used to try and distinguish that natural noise from real underlying shifts in the climate system. It helps identify when a new regime might be starting, and importantly, helps spot the emergence of the human-caused warming signal from the background.
So it's like a statistical detective looking for the exact moment the underlying pattern changed, not just wobbled temporarily.
That's a good way to put it. And to make sure their work was solid, Rahmstorf and Foster didn't just use one temperature record. They used 5 of the major, most respected global data sets. You've got NASA's GIS data, NOAA's data set, one from Berkeley Earth, that's an independent group, the UK Met Office's HAD Crew data set, and the ERA5 reanalysis from the European Weather Center.
Using multiple data sets adds a lot of confidence, right? If they all show something similar despite different methods.
Exactly. It's a way to check for robustness. If the signal appears across different data sets compiled in different ways, you can be much more confident it's real.
Okay, so what did this initial CPA show when they ran it on these 5 data sets before they tried removing the El Niño effects and all that?
Well, this is where it gets interesting and highlights the challenge. Their paper states that standard CPA performed on these data sets up until 2023 actually did not find a statistically significant change point in the warming trend since the big one back in the 1970s. In other words, even with recent warming, CPA alone, looking at the raw, noisy data, still pointed towards that ongoing 0.2 degrees C per decade trajectory being the statistically dominant one.
Wow. So even with the feeling that things were speeding up, the standard analysis couldn't definitively prove it yet because of the noise.
Precisely. So then they added the really hot 2024 data into the mix and reran the CPA. Even then, it still wasn't enough to push the significance of a recent acceleration past that crucial 95% confidence level across the board. They noted it did get over 90% in a couple of the data sets, but that's not typically considered definitive proof in climate science. And the reason, again, it comes back to that short-term natural variability, the El Niños, the La Niñas, the volcanoes. It just adds so much wobble to the data that it masks or dampens the statistical significance of any underlying changes in the rate. So they realized, to get a clear answer, they absolutely had to find a way to mathematically remove those natural blips first to let the underlying trend shine through more clearly.
Okay, so CPA on the raw data wasn't quite enough. The noise was just too loud. This must be where the really clever filtering techniques come in. How did they actually subtract the effects of things like El Niño?
Right. This is the core of their methodological advance. They applied another set of well-established statistical methods specifically designed to estimate and then remove the influence of ENSO, both El Niño and La Niña, those variations in solar output, and the cooling effects of major volcanic eruptions. The key insight here, as they explain it, is that all three of these natural factors can be measured independently. We have indices for EN slow strength, satellite measurements of solar energy, and records of volcanic eruptions and their estimated aerosol output. So you have separate data streams for the potential causes of the noise and for the effect, which is the global temperature. Then you use a technique called lagged correlation analysis.
Lagged correlation analysis. Could you break that down for us? What does the lagged part mean?
It's actually quite intuitive. Lagged just means there's a time delay. When a big El Niño kicks in, the planet doesn't heat up instantly the next day. The ocean releases heat, the atmosphere responds, and the peak impact on global surface temperature might show up, say, a few months later. There's a lag. So what lagged correlation analysis does is it compares the two time series, say, the ENSO index and the global temperature record, but it systematically shifts one relative to the other month by month. It looks for the specific time lag, is it 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, where the statistical connection, the correlation between the ENSO index and the temperature is strongest.
So it finds the delay where the cause, El Niño, has its biggest effect on the temperature.
Exactly. Once you find that lag and measure the strength of the connection, you can build a statistical model that estimates how much of the temperature variation in any given month was likely due to El Niño, or due to solar changes, which have their own lags, or due to volcanic cooling, again with specific lags. And once you have that estimate of the natural influence for each month, you can mathematically subtract it from the actual recorded temperature for that month. It's like statistically cleaning the temperature record, removing the estimated ups and downs caused by these known natural cycles. It's meticulous work aiming to leave behind a clearer picture of the underlying trend driven by other factors, primarily human activity.
That is fascinating. It's like performing statistical surgery on the data. Okay, so they've cleaned the data, removed the estimated effects of ENSO, solar cycles, and volcanoes. What did they do next with this cleaner data set? Did the accelerating trend just pop out then?
Not quite finished yet. Getting the cleaner data was step one. Step two was analyzing the shape of the trend within that cleaned data. For this, they use a couple more sophisticated techniques. One key method was applying a piecewise linear fit, often abbreviated as PLF. They looked at trends over different time scales from 10 years up to 51 years. Now, a piecewise linear fit doesn't try to draw one single straight line through the whole period since the 1970s. Instead, it breaks the timeline into segments or pieces and fits a separate straight line to each piece.
Okay, so it can detect if the slope, the rate of warming, changed between different periods.
Precisely. It looks for change points where the slope of the warming trend significantly shifts. It allows you to see if the warming accelerated or decelerated in specific decades rather than just averaging everything out. And alongside the PLF, they also use something called a low-ES smooth. Low-ES stands for locally estimated scatterplot smoothing. Forget the jargon. Think of it as a very robust way to draw a smooth, flexible curve through the data points. It helps to visualize the overall gradual changes in the trend, filtering out any remaining tiny wiggles and showing the broader shape of how warming has evolved over time. Both PLF and LOES are designed to reveal subtle, underlying shifts in the rate of change that might be hidden if you just looked at the raw, noisy data or tried to fit a single line. They let you see the curvature, the accelerations.
All right, the scene is set. They've meticulously removed the natural noise, and they've applied these powerful tools, PLF and LOES, designed to detect changes in the rate of warming within that clean data. This feels like the moment of revelation. What did this rigorous analysis finally uncover? What's the truth hiding beneath the noise?
This is really the crux of their findings, and it is quite stark. Their analysis, especially the PLF-10, that's the piecewise fit, focusing on the 10-year trends to capture recent changes, showed something dramatic. It indicated that the most recent 10-year warming trend in the clean data is significantly steeper than any previous 10-year trend. How steep? About 0.4 degrees Celsius per decade.
Wait, 0.4? Did you say 0.4? The established rate was 0.2.
Exactly, double. Their analysis points to a warming rate over the last decade that is effectively twice as fast as the average rate the planet experienced from the 1970s up until the recent past. They identified what they term a clear regime shift in the cleaned data, an acceleration. And this shift, this point where the trends steepen, they found it centered around the year 2015 in 4 out of the 5 data sets they analyzed.
Around 2015, so for roughly the last decade, the underlying warming rate has doubled.
That's what the analysis of the clean data strongly indicates. And the LOESS smooth, that smoothing curve, visually confirmed it. It showed the trend bending upwards, accelerating from that roughly 0.15 to 0.2 degrees per decade rate seen between about 1980 and 2000 to more than double that rate in the most recent period. So this isn't just about recent record years, it's about the underlying rate having significantly increased. It's a statistically significant acceleration revealed once the natural noise is accounted for.
That's a profound shift in understanding. Doubling the rate of underlying warming around 2015 is quite alarming. Now, are the scientists totally certain? Do they acknowledge any wiggle room, any limitations in their noise removal method? Because cleaning data like that must involve some assumptions.
Oh, absolutely. And they are very clear about this, which is crucial for scientific integrity. They explicitly state that their method for estimating and removing the effects of El Niño, volcanoes, and solar cycles is an approximation. It's the best estimate based on current understanding and techniques, but it's not perfect. So they acknowledge it's possible that, for example, the full impact of the recent strong El Niño wasn't completely removed, or that some other minor factor might still be influencing the clean data slightly. However, and this is the critical point they make, they also ran analyses where they completely excluded the extremely warm years of 2023 and 2024 from the clean data.
So they tested it even without those most recent, potentially El Niño boosted years.
Yes, and even when they took those years out entirely, they still saw a visible and statistically significant acceleration in the underlying trend. They argue strongly that this remaining acceleration, visible even without 2023 and 24, cannot be explained away by the usual suspects of natural variability or potential imperfections in the noise removal. It points to something more fundamental changing.
Okay, so even accounting for the limitations, the core finding holds. The acceleration seems robust. That sounds like a definitive conclusion then.
It leads them to a very powerful concluding statement. They state that removing the best estimate of these natural influences reduces the noise enough to reveal, quote, a large and significant acceleration of global warming, end quote. The key takeaway from their work, using this adjusted data, is, in their words, there is no longer any doubt about a recent increase in the warming rate. The signal is clear once the noise is sufficiently reduced. Now, it's really, really important here to manage expectations and counter potential misinterpretations. When scientists report an accelerated warming rate like this, it does not mean they're saying, Armageddon by 2030 or anything like that. Sure. No serious climate scientists suggest such things, despite how findings sometimes get twisted in media headlines or on social media.
Right, it's not a prediction of imminent doom, but a finding about the current rate of change and its implications.
Exactly. The consistent warning from climate science is about the urgent need to cut greenhouse gas emissions drastically to stay within limits, like the 1.5 or 2 degrees C targets that are aimed at preventing the most catastrophic, widespread, and irreversible impacts. This finding underscores the urgency of that task. It doesn't negate it or turn it into a Hollywood disaster movie plot. It's a call for faster action based on new evidence.
That distinction is absolutely vital. Okay, so if this accelerated rate, this doubling to around 0.4 degrees C per decade, is now the confirmed underlying trend, What does that actually mean for the future? Especially regarding that 1.5 degrees C Paris target we discussed. The timeline must shift quite dramatically.
It does, and the authors present the projection that flows directly from this accelerated rate. It's quite sobering. They state that if you simply extrapolate this newly revealed warming rate, the one observed over the last decade, in the clean data forward in time, the planet would cross the 1.5 degrees C threshold on a sustained multi-year average basis by late 2026.
Late 2026.
Yeah.
That's next year.
That's next year. Now, this is a projection based on continuing the current accelerated rate, but it starkly highlights how much faster that critical threshold is approaching, according to this analysis, compared to projections based on the old 0.2 degrees C per decade rate. It implies the window to stay below 1.5 degrees C consistently may already be effectively closed, or is closing extremely rapidly. And what does crossing 1.5 degrees C in a sustained way mean? Well, it significantly increases the risk of triggering major climate tipping points. Think faster ice sheet melt in Greenland and Antarctica, leading to much higher sea level rise sooner than expected. It means potentially more rapid intensification of extreme weather, more severe heat waves, droughts, floods. Greater stress on ecosystems like coral reefs and forests, impacting biodiversity. Major challenges to food security as farming conditions change drastically. This isn't just about hitting a number, it's about entering a state with fundamentally higher risks and more severe consequences across the board, happening sooner than we thought based on previous trend analysis.
Late 2026 as the projected crossing point based on this new rate. That really does hammer home the urgency. Does the paper suggest this 0.4 degrees C per decade rate is locked in? Or could it slow down again? Or even worse, speed up further? What factors influence that future path?
They address this uncertainty, which is inherent in climate projections. They acknowledge that the world might not continue to warm at such a fast pace. Future natural variability could play a role. A string of strong La Niñas, maybe a major volcanic eruption. These could temporarily slow the surface warming rate again, masking the underlying trend for a period. Climate system feedbacks are complex. However, they also explicitly state the opposite possibility. Equally, it could continue accelerating to even faster rates.
Faster than double the previous rate.
How? This is where positive feedback loops become a major concern. Things like, as the Arctic melts, less sunlight is reflected by ice and more is absorbed by dark ocean water, causing more warming, causing more melting, it feeds itself, or the thawing of vast areas of permafrost releasing enormous amounts of trapped methane and CO2, which are powerful greenhouse gases. If these feedbacks kick in strongly, they could add extra warming on top of human emissions, potentially pushing the rate even higher than the 0.4 degrees C per decade currently observed. So the paper reveals a clear acceleration has happened, but the future trajectory still depends heavily on these complex feedbacks and, crucially, on the choices we make regarding emissions globally. The science shows the current path is steeper, but the ultimate destination isn't absolutely fixed yet.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. It really shows how vital this kind of painstaking scientific work is, separating the signal from the noise, pushing past the confusing headlines to understand the underlying reality. It's not about inducing panic, but about achieving clarity. So the question for you, listening now, is, having heard how scientists tease out these long-term trends and learning about this confirmed significant acceleration in global warming, what does this mean for you? How does this sharper, more urgent picture influence your perspective? And what questions does it raise for you about the path forward, personally and collectively, especially given these potentially much shorter timelines? That's something to really reflect on.
Absolutely. And we should mention this research paper by Ramstorff and Foster is open source. We'll put a link in the show notes. You can actually go and look at their methodology, their data, their graphs for yourself, engaging directly with the evidence, asking those deeper questions. That's how you build real understanding, especially when there's so much information and sometimes misinformation swirling around. It's about moving from feeling overwhelmed to feeling informed.
Well said. We really hope this deep dive has helped clarify the current state of global warming, revealing the science behind the headlines and highlighting the significance of this recent acceleration. Thank you for joining us. Keep asking questions, stay curious.
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end, and see you in the next video.